Thank you again for joining today's webinar, Taking Control of Your Pest Management, Exclude the Pests, Protect the People, Preserve the Budget. Today's presenter is Jayne Windham of Livable Housing, Inc. She has over 20 years of professional experience in housing and community development programs, including construction oversight for a variety of publicly funded projects. A nationally recognized trainer and consultant, Jayne develops and teaches courses in housing construction and rehab, IPM, and healthy homes. She is a credentialed healthy homes specialist, holds a BS in engineering management, and has also worked in construction management and weatherization. Jayne is a consultant for Stop Pest program at Cornell University's IPM Center, which provides free training and technical assistance to housing authorities and project-based Section 8 programs. Jayne, thank you for joining us today, and I'll hand the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Colleen. I want to thank the Housing Alliance for having me here today, and thank all of you for spending part of your lunch hour with me. I do want to reiterate what Colleen just said in terms of Stop Pests training opportunities. Because we operate under a grant from HUD, there is free training and technical assistance available for housing authorities and those who receive project-based Section 8 rental assistance. So if you are from an organization that you think might qualify for that, feel free to send me an email after the webinar is over today, and I can certainly look into that for you. So I don't know if Albert Einstein ever actually said this, but this has been attributed to him, and it seems to play out well in terms of how many of our current pest control programs are working. You know, we seem to be doing the same thing over and over again sometimes, but not getting the results that we want. So the first thing I'll talk to you about today is educating yourselves a little bit so that you can feel a little bit more comfortable in conversations with your contractor, and then also some ways you can look at holding your pest management contractors accountable for things. Seems like a lot of us are kind of uncomfortable dealing with questioning professionals sometimes, and there's a security level in being able to say, oh, that's the contractor's job, or the exterminator's job. But when we bear in mind that it's our building and our residents and our own health sometimes that we're talking about, along with it being our money, that we certainly have a right and a responsibility to make sure we're educated about the services that we're contracting for. It's like any other agreement for services in pest management, we're going to get only what we ask for. So we have a couple of quick questions to get a sense of who is here today. My first question I wanted to know is if you or your employer currently manage multifamily housing. So if you could just answer yes or no to that. I apologize. This isn't someone dying. It's a large cat meowing in the background. Okay, so it looks like I'll give this a couple more seconds for a few more responses, but we may be at our limit here. So it looks like we have a few more folks who are saying yes than no. I'm going to close this now. So we have 7 yeses and 4 nos. And are you responsible in some way for hiring or procuring pest management services. Maintenance rate. All right, I'll close this as well. So almost 73% said yes to that. And for those of you who are working with pest management contractors, just to get a sense of your comfort level and your capacity, how you feel confident in your capacity to supervise your pest management contractors. Not at all, barely, moderately, somewhat, or very confident. Okay, I'm going to close this as well. And that's great. That's a little more than half of you that feel somewhat or very confident, so that's good. We're going to try to see if we can inch up those of you in the lower numbers and see if we can have you a little higher by the end of this 45 minutes here. Okay, so what's the problem? Well, pests obviously are the problem that we're here to talk about today. We have several priority pests that we talk about in public housing. Generally, it's cockroaches, rodents, and bedbugs. Cockroaches are a big problem for us because they can actually cause as well as exacerbate asthma in infants and young children, trigger asthma attacks, and rodents, mice and rats. We know that they carry diseases and destroy property, can actually chew through wires, causing fires and so on, and they can also trigger asthma attacks. Bedbugs don't actually cause physical health problems, although they have certainly been known to contribute to, stress and mental health issues for folks. But their bites are certainly a nuisance, and they're very expensive for us to eliminate. This is the point in the presentation where I apologize to you ahead of time that, especially if you're eating lunch, because there are going to be some graphic photos ahead. So if you don't have my cast iron stomach for this, again, I apologize. So 4 reasons that pests are a problem for us. The first one is that pests are health hazards. So, the pests and their waste, the things that they leave behind, whether it's their bodily waste, their shed skins, etc., they can actually cause asthma and allergies for folks. Both cockroaches and rodents particularly can do that. Rodents can carry infectious diseases as well. We know that cockroaches and rodents can damage food and property. All sorts of pests in our homes just add to huge stress levels for us, loss of sleep, and certainly a financial burden. Another issue, of course, is that with that asthma connection, just a small amount of cockroach allergen can trigger a reaction. One female cockroach produces about 1,500 units of that a day, but only 8 units would cause a reaction in a sensitive person. So it's very important we get those cleaned up. If we think about all the places where infestations could be health problems for people, homes as well as child care facilities, rec rooms, etc. So the second point is that pesticides can harm humans, and they tend to harm humans more than they harm the pests. Bed bugs have been around. They've been found in Egyptian tombs. We think that cockroaches have been around for about 200 to 300 million years. So they've been pretty adaptable. There are some populations that are especially vulnerable to the effects of these pesticides. Elderly folks, children, pregnant women, anybody who has breathing and lung disorders such as asthma, and folks that have chemical sensitivities. So it kind of makes sense for us to practice more of the prevention-based approaches to pest control if we can, and then we're just going to use the lowest risk pesticides possible when they're needed. One caution, particularly where folks with sensitivities are concerned, is identifying which residents of yours might be especially vulnerable, and having those discussions with your pest control operators to make sure that you can protect those tenants from exposure to chemicals. A lot of the pesticides that we're using actually don't work. Bed bugs and cockroaches especially have become resistant to most of the commonly used chemicals. Most of the products that we use actually have a very short residual, so they do not last very long after the sprays dry. And the thing is that pests are really good at hiding. So, bed bugs are going to be in cracks and crevices, and roaches are primarily hiding inside walls. So for every one that you see, of course, there are going to be many, many more that you don't. And those pesticides, those typical spray pesticide applications, don't reach the places where they're hiding. If you want to think about one way that when pest management uses only spraying for roaches, it's sort of like farming cockroaches, because we're providing all the food and water and shelter that cockroaches can thrive in. And then once a month we come along and kill some off by the pesticides. But as long as we keep that same level of food and water and shelter, the cockroaches just continue to reproduce, and we end up with the same numbers. And the fourth point is that pests violate housing programs and codes, whether it's the HQS or the Uniform Physical Condition Standards. Anybody who's had a REAC inspection recently understands that, the definition of an infestation, let's say, for instance, with cockroaches, if there's one dead roach or roach droppings, it's a health and safety concern, but more than one dead roach or even one live cockroach is observed that's recorded as an infestation. And there's a reason for that, because cockroaches reproduce so quickly, and also because it's very likely, as I said earlier, for every one that we see, there are many more that we don't see. So all pests need three basic things. They need food, water, and shelter. So if we start thinking about taking away any one of those three things, what we find is, sort of like the illustration here with the three-legged stool, that if you take away any one of those legs underneath, the stool just can't stand up. So we can look at ways of eliminating pests by just taking away as many of those legs from under that stool as possible. So when we talk about integrated pest management, or IPM, what we really mean is, looking at multiple approaches that are all going to work together. So we're going to look at using sanitation and exclusion, as well as pesticides when necessary. The pest is the thing that we're just fighting. And the management part really means that, it sort of requires that all staff and the residents work together to oversee and look for, for signs of infestation, and also parts of the building that need to be fixed. A little bit of guidance from HUD on IPM, pointing out that they feel that it can have a good efficacy while protecting the health of residents and staff, that it can also help extend the useful life of a building by taking care of those maintenance issues that can contribute to it. And also eliminates pests in a safer and more long-term, cost-effective way. So what's not to like from that, right? So here's an example. We're going to learn just a little bit about each kind of pest, so that'll help us to develop a more effective IPM strategy here. For instance, here's why we want to stop that one cockroach. If we have one pregnant cockroach in January, they develop one egg case every month. Let's say we have 40 eggs per case, and it was 20 male and 20 female. If they all live and are allowed to continue to reproduce, by June, that one pregnant cockroach would have been responsible for over 18,000 cockroaches. That's why we get written up for only one roach. Rats and mice, for instance, can also reproduce quite quickly, depending on what your issues are. We don't generally see too many rats indoors, but they are certainly an outdoor problem, especially in cities. Sometimes people say, oh, they don't have bones and that's why they can squeeze in everywhere. They do actually have bones, but they are very flexible. I'm convinced that they all take rodent yoga somewhere. If they can squeeze their head through a hole, the whole rest of their body can sort of collapse and get pushed through the hole as well. So rats can generally get through, if you look at the size of a rat skull, they can get through a hole the size of a quarter. They usually live in burrows outside, but they will travel up to 450 feet from their burrows to get food. The larger the rat, the more food they require. Rats can go about 3 or 4 days without food, but only 1 or 2 days without water. Mice can fit through a hole like the size of a dime. And the interesting thing is that they can go a month without drinking. They get almost all the water that they need from the food that they eat. When you think about what else could fit through holes this size, any exclusion methods that we use for rodents will often work for cockroaches as well. So in thinking about ways to help eliminate them, if we think about, limiting their access to food, right, that would be one of those 3 legs on the stool. Rodents like human food. They like fresh food. So if we know what one is eating, that will help us know what we can use for bait on a trap. And our third pest, just to get a little education here, is on bed bugs. So they tend to live, only inside homes, in buildings. They can fit into a crack or crevice as small as any place where a credit card edge can fit. So you can see in that lower right-hand photograph, we've given you a credit card there for scale. And they tend to be on any item near where people rest. People hang around for 20 to 30 minutes so that bed bugs can get their blood meal. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bed, even though we call them bed bugs. They will hang out on sofas and recliners and people's wheelchairs and so on. They don't eat anything except our blood. So that does make it a little bit more difficult for us to eliminate their food and water sources because we're it. They don't fly and they don't jump, but they do crawl. They can crawl about as fast as an ant. And when there are severe infestations, they can travel pretty easily between units. Bed bugs are not necessarily considered to be a housekeeping problem, but sanitation can play a role sometimes in treatment because a cluttered apartment is going to be a little bit more difficult to treat. If we clean more often, though, since bed bugs can hide anywhere, that cleaning will tend to unearth them. Vacuuming and washing bed linens often, helps keep populations from growing, for instance. So how big is our pest problem once we suspect that we have one? I'm going to show you some ways you can find out. So one of the things we want to do, because IPM is proactive and not reactive, is to make sure that we monitor and inspect. Using cockroaches as an example here, since cockroaches are mostly active at night and they like to hide really well, putting out these sticky monitors help us find them, during the times of day and in the places where people don't usually look. These can be placed in units, particularly in kitchens and in bathrooms near sources of water, but also in multifamily units near trash chutes and trash storage areas. They do need to be checked and changed periodically. So there is usually a place on these where you can write down the date and the specific location, unit such and such, bathroom sink, near the refrigerator, and so on. Because this helps us notice patterns and also how long it took to catch the number of cockroaches that are on there. So these don't have any pesticide on them. There's just a mineral-based glue on the paper, and they fold them up in that triangle to, try to keep other pests or the pets out. But the key is to properly place them in areas where cockroaches might want to be. So if you look at the monitors in this photo, the ones on the left were in the kitchen and the bathroom, which is not a real surprise. The other traps were in the bedroom. And again, when we have a good size infestation, they will spread out throughout an apartment because, of course, people, also snack in front of the television set, eat or drink in bedrooms as well. So we, once we know we have an infestation, we do want to monitor the entire apartment. The very tiny ones that you can see, particularly on the left-hand side of that second from the left monitor, are those are the babies, and the nymphs, we call them, and that tells us that we are very, very close to the hiding place for the cockroaches, because cockroach babies tend not to travel more than a foot or two away from the hiding place. The adult males will maybe go about 12 feet away, and females will tend to stay only within a 6-foot radius or so. So again, these have no glue, they have no poison. Sometimes we will catch cockroaches on them, obviously, which is good for monitoring. They can stay alive on here for a while. So if you were to be gathering these, for instance, you see the tongs in the background there. It's one way to avoid having to touch them, and I'd suggest you put them in a zipper bag so that nothing that could possibly be alive in there can escape. So again, since these have no pesticides, this is something that anybody can do. We don't need the pest control operator to be doing that. And one thing we don't want to do is, if we're using an IPM program particularly, is wait for residents to complain. They don't complain sometimes for a variety of reasons. They're afraid they're going to be charged. They might be charged money, or they're going to be evicted. They're sometimes kind of embarrassed to complain. Some folks don't even notice that they have a problem. They don't react, particularly in the case of bed bugs. If they don't have a reaction to bites, they may not even notice that they do have a problem. So, this way we would monitor for bed bugs. This is a moat-style monitor that's shown under a bed leg here, and this is a good way. I'm going to show you another picture again in a moment, but this is a good way to find out if there are bed bugs either trying to climb up the bed, or are falling back down from the mattress. So the monitor here that's on the left is what we call a moat-style monitor, or an interceptor monitor. And these will help us find 95% of bedbug infestations. We will coincidentally trap and kill a few bugs, but again, with monitoring, our point is just to find out, if we have a problem and what that level of infestation is. And then it will also tell us afterwards, if we continue to use them, if our treatment is successful. The monitor, again, that's on the left, that moat style one, we need to put those someplace where the bed bugs are going to walk over them, so they tend to go under legs of beds or other furniture. We can tell if the bed bugs are trying to crawl up to the bed because they will crawl up the side from the outside and land in that outside section of the moat. Any bed bugs that are in the bed will fall down the legs and fall into that center section, so that gives us a sense of that as well. There is texture on the outside of these interceptors so the bed bugs can climb up into it, but then it's smooth when they get inside and they can't get back out, so that's how they manage to stay trapped in there. The one on the right is called a volcano bed bug trap, and these are better for situations where we don't have a big furniture leg that we can just put into a moat. For instance, if a person has a platform bed, we can just put it next to it instead. And we can also use these in vacant units as well. We can use them as is, just as a trap, or there is also an attractant or a lure that's sort of like a little foil wrapped white that goes inside the middle of that, and it has an attractive chemical that sort of smells like dirty socks, actually, that will attract bed bugs to places where it's not practical to put those moats. So how often should we be inspecting units? Well, it kind of depends on the history of the building that we're in, right, and what pests we're looking for. Are we looking for roaches? Are we looking for bed bugs? In all units, we should be doing an annual proactive inspection for all sorts of pests, but any units that are undergoing treatment, we should be monitoring and inspecting monthly. And the thing with monitors, again, is that they can be checked by anybody. So if you don't feel like this is something you want to have your contractor come in and do regularly, anytime that staff is in an apartment, it takes a matter of seconds to peek at a monitor that's under a sink, bathroom sink, kitchen sink, et cetera, and just get a sense of what's going on with the roaches. If we have units that are undergoing treatment, particularly for bed bugs, I have the little Rubik's Cube here because I sort of like to use that. It's like that Hollywood Squares analogy that we should absolutely be sure that we're inspecting adjacent units as well until we're positive that the infestation has been cleared in a unit because, as I mentioned earlier, bed bugs can easily crawl between units. With mice, we don't so much have a tool to help us monitor or inspect for them, but it's pretty easy to look for rodent droppings, for instance, while we're in a unit. So what are some of the things that we can do now that we've identified our problem and we've tried to quantify it a little bit? What are the fixes that are available to us? So one of the first things we like to talk about is sanitation, because we want to eliminate the food source for pests, first of all, but also any places where they could be hiding, their harborage spots. We want to be certain that when we are cleaning that we are getting rid of, the pests and whatever they might leave behind, whether it's their frass or the shed skins from cockroaches and bed bugs. They actually have their skeletons on the outside, so in order to grow, they shed those skins as they mature, and they leave these behind. And all of these things, are are allergens for humans, and certainly it's the way that rodents and cockroaches communicate with each other by leaving behind their frass and their drops of urine and so on. So we want to mess with their communication systems as much as possible. If we are using, the next thing we want to think about is exclusion, sealing up all the cracks and crevices and entry points where they could be traveling in from outside and also from other units as well. So that's just as important as sanitation is. with rodents, our recommendation is always that we use traps. They're cheap and effective. And then as a last resort, we want to, look at the different types of pesticides we can use, remembering that, those should be left to the pest management professionals and using the least toxic solutions possible. So when we think about the food sources, what do cockroaches eat? They will eat just about anything. So they'll eat crumbs, they'll eat grease, trash. They love cardboard boxes because it's a place to hide, and they can eat the glue, and usually there's something spilled inside there as well. So that's a great sort of like a condominium for cockroaches, if you will. Cleaning up grease. One drop of grease will actually feed 20 cockroaches for one day, or one cockroach for 20 days if it doesn't get cleaned up in that amount of time. But, we want to make sure. Now, here's an example. This was under a sink-base cabinet, kitchen sink-base cabinet, and you can see that there all those little brown spots down at the bottom of the cabinet are all dead roaches. There is a roach trap in there up on top of the fruit snacks box. You can see that. That would have probably worked even better if there were not still fruit snacks in the box, but there actually were. So I'm sure this resident meant well and thought that they were doing the right thing by killing the roaches, but they also need to be cleaned up after this is still an allergen. Vacuuming, using a vacuum is absolutely a key tool for cleaning up after either if we have an infestation of bed bugs or of cockroaches. We can get rid of a lot of cockroaches in a very short period of time there. There is a trick you can do with the vacuum if you don't want the pests going up into the body of the vacuum, which is just by simply sticking a part of a nylon stocking down before you attach the nozzle end on, and then you can collect all the pests right in that cut off nylon or knee-high stocking, and you don't contaminate the rest of your vacuum. Moving on to mice, mice tend to dribble microscopic drops of urine and mouse poop behind them pretty much every place they go. This is how they communicate with each other. They leave that trail of urine around their known paths, and they tend to travel the same paths every evening. So those droppings that they leave behind actually can carry infectious disease and pathogens in them. So we want to be very careful when we approach rodent droppings. The CDC has come up with some specific recommendations for cleaning up after rodent droppings. So this is one of the few times we don't want to use the vacuum. So when we're cleaning, we want to use an N95 respirator and wear gloves. Spray down, if we have a nest available, spray that down and the urine and droppings with, either a disinfectant cleaner or a mixture of bleach and water. So that would be 1 part of bleach to 10 parts of water, and let it soak. Wipe it up with a paper towel, something that we can dispose of and not reuse, and put all that waste in a sealed bag. And those, again, we can get more information for you if you need it, but those are all directly on the CDC website because those droppings are so dangerous for folks' health. With bed bugs, some of the things that we want to make sure we get rid of, again, using that vacuum. Bed bugs are just like roaches, and they don't have that stretchy skin, so they shed that outer layer. They'll actually go from being very tiny. The babies are about the size of a poppy seed, and they're about the size of an apple seed when they're full grown, when they're mature. Another thing relative to sanitation is thinking about dumpsters around the property, right? This dumpster on the bottom left here, needs to be switched out for one that doesn't have holes and doesn't have rust in it. You know, dumpsters do need to have drainage holes in them, but they should be screened with heavy mesh screening on them so that the rats can't easily get into these. The one that's on the right should be much further away from the building. We recommend that they're at least 30 feet away from the building. And, you know, we either need more dumpsters here or we need to have them emptied more often. They need to be covered. They need to stay closed. And we need to sort of have that agreement with the tenants that when they take trash out, that they're going to close the dumpster afterwards. You know, we hear sometimes that, well, you know, the kids take it out and they can't close the cover. That's one of those things that does need to be the residents' responsibility, is keeping those things closed. So when we're talking about, you know, exclusion, we're looking at ways to keep pests out of the building, out of different units. That picture on the left sort of reminds me of what we talk of as you know, having plumber's disease. Somebody drilled a hole much bigger than we maybe needed for that pipe. So when we have situations where we have a hole that caulk alone wouldn't fill, as we do in this photo here, we want to make sure that we put a material in there that's going to discourage particularly rodents from being able to chew through it. They have no trouble chewing through spray foam at all. They can chew through a lot of materials, but something like this copper mesh that's right here, or a steel product, is very good to stuff in the hole, but then we need to cover it and still seal it with, you know, using spackle, caulk, putty, whatever the appropriate sealant would be depending on where we are. As I said, just spray foam alone won't do it. And if we just leave the mesh without covering over it, they can push that right out of the hole. Another good thing to do under sinks and so on is make sure that we have those escutcheon plates in place and that they are firmly attached as well. The photo on the right is actually some wallpaper that's coming loose, and you can see down at the lower section of that where it's coming loose that we have cockroaches living behind that, and that's all cockroach frass around there that's been left behind. So, you know, that needs to be removed or repaired, and then all of that needs to be cleaned as well. When we're cleaning up just after cockroaches, simple soap and water will work. We don't need to use any kind of scented detergents or anything with harsh chemicals in it. Soap and water will work great and cut down on the allergens. Traps, you know, effective, reusable. Some people get a little nervous with the wooden traps. You can get those for like $2 for $1, though. You can throw it out with the mouse in it, right? We don't even have to bother reusing that. That black style that's down at the bottom is called a T-Rex, and that sort of works like a binder clip, and those are much easier to not only to set but also to empty, because you can just sort of dump the rodent right out. Bait traps with whatever food it is that you think your rodents have been eating, and make sure that you set the trap so that the business end is
Hi, Jayne. We seem to have lost your audio. If you're still on the call, if you could just press *7 to see if that you got muted by mistake. Jayne, are you still on the call? Jayne, if you could try hanging up and redialing in and then press *7 to unmute your phone line, that would be great.
The conference has been muted.
Hi, Jayne. If you are having any connection issues, if you could just call into the conference number and press *7 to unmute yourself.
Did this work?
Yep, there we go.
Great. Okay. I
Sorry
was not talking to myself for very long. That's okay.
Sorry, everybody, for the technical difficulties.
When all of these things fail, this is the time to call in the pest management professional and start considering the use of some pesticides. One of the things we do want to think about is here in Pennsylvania, the use of pesticides, which are, any of these substances that are intended to control or kill pest infestations. It does require an applicator's license. If we're either applying pesticide in someone else's home for pay or applying pesticides in public spaces. So, as maintenance folks and as folks who own and operate the building, if we are in a multifamily building that is any more than 3 units, we are required to have a pest operator's license. And this is true for even those things that you can buy in the big box stores, in the Isle of Death types of things. Just because we can buy it, once we cross that line of applying it in someone else's home for pay, which we do as employees, this requires a license. So our risk for exposure to pesticides, all really has a lot to do with what's our risk of coming in contact to them. So, things like tamper-resistant bait stations, we're going to have much less risk of actually touching the pesticide or coming in direct exposure to it than we would if we were using something like a total release fogger, for instance, that gets everywhere. Another risk with pesticides, of course, is that people can misuse them, especially when residents are doing that, because they can apply it incorrectly. Everybody gets tempted, when they see a pest, instead of just one spray, you want to just empty the entire can on it sometimes because we want to really teach a lesson. So when looking at the lower risk pesticides, we want to consider using baits. We want to know if our contractor is using cockroach baits. Calendar pesticide sprays don't tend to achieve any real cockroach control because, of course, they don't get to all the places where the cockroaches are. How these baits work, and this is one of the disgusting things for over lunch, is that the roaches will go in. There is a poison, a stomach poison that is inside the center of those baits, and there's an attractive food source around it. So they go in and they eat the bait. And I mentioned earlier that cockroaches will eat anything. Well, they will eat absolutely anything, and that includes they eat each other's dead bodies and they eat each other's frass. So when the cockroach eats this poison and then goes back to their hiding place and dies, the other cockroaches don't think anything of it, and they just sort of treat it like dinner got delivered, and they eat the dead cockroach and then they die. So that's why those bait stations are really genius, because they get to the roaches in all the places where we can't. For the areas where we can't fit one of those bait stations, you can see the little gel tube being applied in a spot underneath, and that has the same sort of chemical in it, and it will have the same kind of reaction. They work better in places where they're the only food source in the area, but they will absolutely still work even in messy apartments. Sometimes it just means that we need to use more bait. So this is really important. Here's a picture that just shows you very quickly. The line at the top, the blue line, was a unit that had a control unit had no baits in it whatsoever. We tried 4 or 5 different baits down at the bottom, and these were very messy, low sanitation units, and we still had 90 to 98% reductions. That was a test that was done by Virginia Tech. Some quick things you're going to want to ask your contractor, do they use insecticidal dusts? These things will work either as a stomach poison, so that will work on cockroaches. They can use those borates, and when the cockroaches groom themselves, they swallow it and they die, and it will poison them. That will not work on bed bugs because they don't groom themselves the same way. So what we suggest for them are, dusts that include a silica, so it has like tiny shards of glass in it, and it affects their outer layer, and they can't retain enough liquid in their skin, and they die. There are also insect growth regulators that will interfere with the maturity of pests, and those can be a good choice as well. You can see in the right-hand picture there is one of those, rodenticide or bait stations right near this dumpster, and the photo on the left shows you how many rat burrows there were surrounding this dumpster, because if we're going to put those rodenticides out, we also need to manage those dumpsters better. This was a location where the dumpsters were routinely overflowing, they were not covered, and the rodents were just completely ignoring the rodenticides. They were also not checked often enough by the pest control people, so the rodenticide could have been removed a long time ago, and nobody was bothering to follow up on these. And after they've been outside for a while, if they've been floating around in melting snow, as was the case here, or a lot of water, they're no longer useful as well. You got to check under the top of the stove. A lot of times what we call appliance mice get in and live in the sides of the snow. They leave their droppings behind, and as people use their stoves and their ovens, all of those droppings volatilize every time they cook, and folks are actually breathing in all those urinary proteins and so on. So we want to make sure somebody's checking there as well. A quick focus here on bed bugs. That's actually a photo at the top of bed bugs mating. I thought you would want to know. Some of the things we want to make sure that we're using a vacuum, that we're considering things like isolation. So we want to make sure that the bed is sort of separated from touching anything else, put up on those moat-style monitors that we have encasements on the mattress and especially on the box springs, because that makes it much easier to conduct inspections. Heat is a really good tool. Some of the ones that we can use ourselves would be clothes dryers. The hot setting on a dryer is a great option, 30 minutes in the dryer for things that can't be washed, stuffed animals, draperies, etc. Steam is a good option. Bed bugs will die when they're exposed to anything that's over 120 degrees for 30 minutes. They have a thermal death point of 118, actually. So, there are different heat options. Steam is one of those, and that one staff can do if you want to invest in a steamer, but it is slow going. And then, of course, we do have pesticide options as well for pest management to use. Why do we want them to use a vacuum? Well, this is a whole bunch of bed bugs, right? So if they come in to use a spray application here and don't clean up the dead bodies that are already there, or even the live bodies that are there. First of all, the spray won't get to the bed bugs that are hiding underneath. But secondly, we don't know if these are left from a previous infestation or from a current infestation. So it's really important to clean up. Another non-chemical treatment is heat. We can use, whole unit heat, but this is a heat chamber, which is good for using for putting furniture in for treatment, etc. You can even build your own. We do have instructions from the University of Florida for that. And I talked about the steam and the dryers already. So whole unit heat treatment can be good for cluttered apartments because sometimes it's difficult to get at everything with the spray and with other types of cleaning as well. What we want to make sure we do is that we ask for temperature records, that the contractor has been able to reach that temperature, in the core of furniture and so on for at least 30 minutes, and you can ask for those records. One thing that we did, which was really surprising, was we have a study here of just exclusion for bed bugs. So this was just sealing up cracks and crevices in this 107-unit high-rise that was being treated in Illinois. The maintenance department sealed around the hot water distribution pipes and did some education. And they went from having 20 units under treatment to having only one under treatment. No pesticides at all, just with using exclusion. So we want to mix up our treatments, a combination of heat, pesticide, and make sure that they're vacuuming for all treatments. So sort of to summarize here, depending on, for all our pests, there are all these things that can be done with no license required. The exclusion and the cleaning and the decluttering and the checking monitors and traps, moving furniture, putting encasements on, and the heat treatments. So regardless of what the pest is, all of these things, should you choose to do it, staff could do it or the contractor could do it, but somebody needs to be doing it. So making sure that it's either in your contract that this is what your contractor is going to do, or you folks take it on as a staff responsibility. The things we would want to leave to the experts would be, the very thorough inspections, including any canine inspections for bed bugs, whole unit heat treatments, and pesticide applications. So, this is really a little bit about watching the contractor's performance, right? It's a partnership. IPM is a partnership, but you're the senior partner in this. And it really is our job to oversee what they're doing, make sure that we have records of actual progress and reduction in pest population. It's good for the pest management professionals to be the ones who are reporting their monitoring results to us. And we should be working together with them to decide which ones are the units that need the most attention. And the way we know that is based on our monitoring. If you're hiring a bed bug contractor in particular, you can look for some of these certifications. And we have a flyer for you on selecting bed bug contractors. If you would like that, we can get that for you as well. That's available on the Stop Pest website. And these are some of the things you're going to want to ask your contractor as you're hiring one. Are they using any non-chemical tools that we talked about, vacuums and traps? Are they monitoring who's cleaning? Are they doing the exclusion efforts? How often are they inspecting? And are they actually telling you that they're going to eliminate pests? We want to make sure that they're keeping good records and that they're mentioning specifically that IPM is in the contract. You can require, to find out certain details, how many techs are going to be in your unit every month, what are they going to be doing for monitoring, what products and how much they're applying. Sometimes, particularly with things like baits, it's not that baits don't work, it's just that in heavier infestations they just need to use more bait. So it's important to review and keep those records. Look at the resident prep in case there is any. See if it's something that it makes any sense that you could accomplish it yourself. How long would it take you to do? How long would it take for, think about your mother, for instance. Could she do this? If not, we either need to think about having some staff available to help with this, or we need to be working with a contractor who's going to use a much lower prep. This is just a quick example of some cockroach math, which you would want to do yourself based on working with your contractor. But the bottom line on this one is that this technician was spending less than 5 minutes per door, and that was including all the walking and the knocking and the talking and everything else in between. And that's really not enough time to conduct the IPM. So you want to look carefully at that on your contract. Because if you don't have fewer pests and your numbers aren't declining, you're not getting your money's worth. Some quick things about protecting yourself in units. You can spray yourself with off before you go in, something that has DEET. Don't sit on furniture, especially not upholstered furniture. Inspect yourself. You can use a lint roller when you leave. Make sure you haven't picked anything up. And try to avoid fabric-covered furniture in your community areas. Okay, the last slide is again a little push for stoppest.org. That's our website. So you can get a lot of information from that and also request training. I have one final poll question here for you to just see if now you feel any more confident in your capacity to supervise your pest management contract.
Okay, what do you say? Not at all? Barely? Not at all? Talk to me.
If you do have your phone unmuted, if you could just press *6, we are getting some feedback from the line.
That's us. She heard you say that.
And I'm still hearing you say it. Well, I'm going to close this because it's 1 o'clock. So we have a good percentage of people who, feel somewhat better prepared, and that's good. Gives us a purpose in life here. For the person on here who is not so much feeling the love here, we'd be happy to work with you further and see if there's anything else we can do. But I'm going to move on, and if anybody wants to stick around for a couple of minutes, if you have any questions that I can answer now, or otherwise, like I said, go to the Stop Pests website, or feel free to email me directly.
Jayne, I did see a question from Jeff. Will this count towards continuing education for a pest control operator? The Housing Alliance does not provide that type of continuing education, but I didn't know, Jayne, if you had approval for that.
No, the sponsor of whatever training it is would need to apply ahead of time for the CEUs for that.
Okay, so yes, Jeff, unfortunately there will be no continuing education for today's webinar. And we also will be sending out a copy of the slides as well as the recording of the webinar from today early next week. And if anybody
Yeah,
has
and
any questions,
I do apologize. I do see the note here that, I did pick up the pace a little bit on the last couple of slides. We lost a bit of time there with the audio, and I don't know what the deal was with my phone, but I'm sorry. I'm just trying to respect the fact that I know you're all signed on for only an hour. So, I'm certainly happy to talk with anybody individually, and of course you will get copies of the slides as well. So thanks again for having me. I appreciate it.
great. Thank you, Jayne, again for joining us and presenting today's webinar. And I want to thank everybody for joining today's webinar. And I just wanted to let you know that the Housing Alliance will be having our annual Homes Within Reach conference October 29th through the 31st. And we currently have registration open, and we hope to see everybody there. So thank you everybody again for joining today's webinar, and have a great rest of your week and a great weekend.